The judge sat firm, ready to deliver her ruling. Her authority was absolute, until now. Then, Emily raised a single finger, locking eyes with the judge. "You can't decide my fate!" The courtroom froze. And in that moment, everything changed. The courtroom was suffused with a palpable tension, the kind that thickens the air and makes every whisper sound like a shout. Wooden benches, worn by years of use, were filled to capacity with an array of lawyers in sharp suits, eager reporters clutching notepads, and spectators whose expressions ranged from concern to curiosity. At the heart of this judicial theater stood Judge Katherine Wallace, her reputation as a stringent, no-nonsense adjudicator preceding her. She sat elevated on the bench, her gaze sweeping over the attendees with an austere demeanor that commanded respect and, for some, fear. In stark contrast to the seasoned judge was Emily Carter, a 6-year-old black girl caught in the throes of a brutal custody battle that had captured the community's attention. Small in stature but formidable in spirit, Emily stood beside her lawyer, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides, a testament to the storm of emotions brewing inside her. Her wide eyes, brimming with a mix of determination and anxiety, were fixed unblinkingly on Judge Wallace. The case before the court was as complex as it was contentious, involving multiple family members each claiming they were best suited to take custody of Emily. The arguments had been presented, the testimonies given, and now all awaited the final decision from Judge Wallace, whose influence over Emily's future was profound and decisive. As the clock ticked ominously, the room's atmosphere thickened further. Judge Wallace cleared her throat, a sound that echoed ominously through the silent courtroom, signaling her readiness to deliver the verdict that would shape a young girl's life. She reached for her gavel, her movements deliberate and final. But just as the gavel was poised to strike, a small, unexpected voice cut through the tension. Emily, moving with a sudden burst of courage, stepped forward from the safety of her lawyer's side. Her tiny hand rose, her finger pointing directly at the judge, an audacious challenge to the authority before her. The room fell deathly silent, all eyes riveted on the small figure challenging the court's power. "You can't decide my fate!" Emily's voice, clear and unwavering, filled the room, her declaration ringing in the stunned silence that followed. Her words were not just a protest, they were a powerful assertion of her agency, an emphatic rejection of the idea that her future was merely something to be decided upon rather than lived. The gasps that echoed through the courtroom reflected the shock and awe of those present. Judge Wallace, so accustomed to control and compliance, found herself momentarily stunned, her gavel frozen mid-air. The child's bold defiance was unprecedented, challenging not just a legal decision, but the very foundations of judicial authority as it pertained to personal destiny. In that moment, the balance of power shifted palpably. Emily's challenge resonated not just as a personal plea for autonomy, but as a broader critique of a system that often overlooked the voices it was meant to protect and serve. The courtroom, unprepared for such raw and poignant truth from the most innocent among them, was left reeling. As the seconds stretched out, the implications of Emily's declaration began to ripple outward, prompting whispers among the spectators and uncomfortable shifts among the legal professionals present. Judge Wallace, recovering her composure, realized that the day's proceedings would not conclude as routinely as she had anticipated. The impact of Emily's words lingered in the air, a reminder that the law, while powerful, was not infallible, and the human element it sought to govern was unpredictable and, at times, profoundly transformative. What happened next would not just decide a child's custody, but would potentially influence the approach to juvenile rights within the legal system, forever altering the course of how such cases were perceived and handled. In the grandeur of the courtroom, with its high ceilings and echoing walls, Judge Katherine Wallace tried to reassert her authority over a scenario slipping unexpectedly from her grasp. "Young lady, this is a court of law. Sit down," she commanded, her voice stern, aimed at regaining control over the proceedings that had taken an unprecedented turn. However, Emily Carter, small in stature but immense in spirit, stood her ground. Her fists remained clenched at her sides, a physical manifestation of her inner resolve. "You don't know me. You don't know what's right for me," she replied, her voice steady and imbued with a force that belied her age. Her words rang out, clear and defiant, striking a chord among the spectators whose murmurs of astonishment filled the room. The judge narrowed her eyes, not accustomed to being challenged, let alone by someone so young. The audacity of Emily's stance was unsettling, yet compelling in its sincerity. Beside Emily, her lawyer, caught between professional duty and the poignant truth of his client's words, hesitated. Should he restrain her, or let this rare moment of raw honesty play out? Emily, sensing the impact of her words, took another step forward, her resolve hardening. "You only see papers. You don't see what happens when I go home," she declared, her voice gaining strength as she spoke of realities that the sterile documents and formal arguments failed to capture. At this, a visible shift occurred in Judge Wallace's demeanor. She leaned back, discomfort apparent in her movement as the room's tension escalated palpably. Emily's mother, seated in the gallery, wiped tears from her eyes, her emotions torn between pride and fear, unsure of how to respond to her daughter's unexpected crusade. Judge Wallace, attempting to restore order and maintain the decorum of her courtroom, raised her hand. "That's enough. The decision is final," she interjected sharply, trying to close the discussion and proceed with her ruling. But Emily was undeterred. Shaking her head emphatically, she countered, "No, not yet." Her refusal to be silenced or dismissed resonated throughout the courtroom, a stark challenge to the judge's attempt to finalize the proceedings without further debate. The room fell into a charged silence, every attendee holding their breath. The gravity of the moment was undeniable. Here was a 6-year-old girl, standing in a courtroom, boldly confronting the very essence of judicial authority. Her courage, juxtaposed with her vulnerability, painted a powerful picture that none present could easily dismiss. Judge Wallace, faced with a dilemma that challenged her professional judgment and personal perceptions, paused. The courtroom awaited her response, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The eyes of the spectators, the lawyers, and even the court staff were fixed on the small figure, who had just challenged a legal system much larger and more complex than she could possibly understand. In this crucial moment, the lines between legal protocols and human empathy blurred. The judge, known for her stringent adherence to the law, found herself reconsidering not just the verdict, but the way in which justice was served. Emily's defiance had sparked a deeper reflection on the part of those in power, prompting a re-evaluation of how the voices of the most vulnerable are heard and acknowledged in the halls of justice. As Emily stood there, her stance resolute, it became clear that this was more than a custody battle. It was a poignant demonstration of individual agency and the importance of understanding and compassion in the pursuit of justice. The young girl's bravery was a beacon, illuminating the often overlooked personal stories behind legal cases, and challenging those in positions of power to consider more deeply the lives affected by their decisions. A 6-year-old had indeed stopped a judge in her tracks, and she wasn't done yet. The courtroom, so often a stage for the predictable exercise of law, was now the setting for an extraordinary assertion of personal truth and the undeniable impact of speaking truth to power. In the tense atmosphere of the courtroom, a pivotal moment unfolded as young Emily Carter, with a determination belying her tender age, reached into the pocket of her dress. Her movements were deliberate, each step measured as she approached the clerk's desk, her small hand clutching a folded piece of paper that seemed almost inconsequential against the backdrop of legal documents and case files. Yet the significance of this simple act was about to become startlingly clear. Judge Katherine Wallace, who had been gripping her gavel with an air of ready authority, felt a sudden tightening in her chest as she watched the child approach the clerk. Her experienced eyes narrowed, sensing the impending shift in the dynamics of her courtroom. With a slight, almost imperceptible nod, she gave the clerk permission to receive what Emily was offering. The clerk, a middle-aged man with decades of courtroom experience, looked from the judge to the child, his expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. He accepted the paper with a gentle hand, mindful of the gravity that even the smallest actions held within these walls. Unfolding the paper, he glanced at its contents before passing it up to Judge Wallace, his eyes betraying a flicker of surprise. As the paper made its way to the bench, the courtroom fell into a hush, the silence punctuated only by the soft rustling of the paper and the collective breath of the audience. Judge Wallace took the document, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to read. The words on the page seemed to strike her with the force of a physical blow. Her complexion paled, her eyes widening in shock as she read through the contents once, then again, her disbelief growing with each word. The courtroom, a microcosm of the larger world, watched in rapt attention, the spectators and legal professionals alike sensing the magnitude of the revelation. Emily, standing small but resolute, crossed her arms and fixed her gaze on the judge, her voice small but fierce as she declared, "Now you know." Judge Wallace, a veteran of the law known for her composure under pressure, found herself momentarily at a loss. The information laid out in the paper was not just unexpected, it was explosive, altering the very foundation of the case before her. It revealed hidden truths about Emily's family situation, detailing circumstances and allegations that had not been disclosed during the formal proceedings. This new evidence shed light on the darker realities Emily faced at home, realities that were previously obscured by the veneer of normalcy presented in court. The judge exhaled sharply, her usual stoic demeanor giving way to a rare display of emotion. The balance of power in the courtroom had indeed flipped. The authority she wielded was now tempered by the raw truth of a child's plight, a truth that demanded not just judicial consideration, but human compassion. As the implications of the document began to resonate, the air in the room thickened with anticipation and anxiety. What had been a straightforward custody hearing was now a complex moral and legal dilemma, one that required Judge Wallace to navigate not only the letter of the law, but also the deeper, more turbulent waters of ethical responsibility. The document, now a central piece of evidence, was a game-changer. It called into question the motives and character of the parties involved in Emily's life. It highlighted negligence and manipulation, casting shadows where there had previously been presumed light. For Emily, this was more than a legal victory in the making. It was a vindication of her own experiences, a loud affirmation that her voice, however small, deserved to be heard and heeded. Judge Wallace, visibly shaken but also galvanized by the revelation, knew that the path forward was altered irrevocably. The case would need to be reevaluated in the light of this new evidence, and the decisions she made would now be scrutinized under the harsh lens of this unexpected truth. The courtroom awaited her response, the silence a heavy cloak around the shoulders of all present. Emily's simple act of handing over that piece of paper had transformed the narrative. It had shifted the course of her custody battle, sure. But more importantly, it had challenged the perceptions of everyone in the room about what justice truly meant for a child caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts. The judge's next words would be critical. The weight of her forthcoming decisions made all the heavier by the eyes of the child who had dared to challenge the system, and by the eyes of those who now looked to her for fairness, in a situation muddied by hidden truths. Because whatever was on that paper just changed everything. Judge Katherine Wallace felt the weight of every eye in the courtroom as she placed the paper down. Her hands, normally steady and sure, trembled slightly, a visual testament to the gravity of what she had just read. The document had unveiled secrets too significant to ignore. Secrets that colored the entire case in a starkly different light. Attempting to restore some semblance of order, she cleared her throat, her voice echoing in the now silent courtroom. This changes things, she declared, her tone a mix of resolve and surprise. The contents of that paper had not only challenged her previous perceptions, but had also introduced a pivotal twist in the custody battle's narrative. At this, the opposing lawyer, a man known for his aggressive courtroom tactics, stood abruptly, his face flushed with indignation. "Your Honor, this child's outburst shouldn't influence the ruling," he objected, his voice rising in a mix of desperation and disbelief. He attempted to dismiss Emily's act as mere theatrics, unsuitable for serious legal consideration. Judge Wallace responded with a firm slam of her gavel, the sound sharp and commanding. "Quiet," she ordered, her gaze stern, leaving no room for further interruptions. Her authority reasserted, she turned back to Emily, her expression softening as she addressed the young girl directly. "Where did you get this?" she inquired gently, understanding that the answer might unravel even more about the complicated dynamics at play. Emily took a deep breath, her small shoulders squared as if bracing against the magnitude of her next words. "From my room. I kept it because I knew no one would believe me," she replied, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of vulnerability. Her admission spoke volumes about her awareness of the skepticism she faced, a skepticism that could have silenced her had she not found the courage to speak out. The judge exhaled deeply, her eyes sweeping over the faces in the courtroom. Emily's mother, whose expression was a complex tapestry of emotions. The lawyers, each set in their professional masks but clearly unnerved. And the spectators, who had become witnesses to a narrative far more complex than they had anticipated. In that moment, Judge Wallace realized the decision resting on her shoulders was more than a legal formality. It was a moral imperative. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of impending judgment. Judge Wallace knew that her ruling would set a precedent, not just for the parties involved, but for how such cases were perceived and handled in the future. She pondered the implications of the document, the credibility of the testimonies, and the undeniable bravery of a child who dared to challenge the system. With the courtroom holding its collective breath, Judge Wallace made her decision. It was not a decision that had been scripted by legal doctrines or by the persuasive arguments of seasoned lawyers. It was a decision informed by a raw, unfiltered truth that had emerged unexpectedly but irrevocably. "And that final decision?" she began, her voice clear and resonant. "It's not what anyone expected." What followed was a directive that reshaped the custody arrangements, taking into account not only the legal standards but also the emotional and psychological well-being of Emily. Judge Wallace ordered a re-evaluation of the living conditions and mandated ongoing supervision to ensure that Emily's environment would be one of support and safety. She also called for a detailed investigation into the allegations implied by the document Emily had presented. As Judge Wallace concluded the session, the courtroom erupted into a cacophony of reactions, some shocked, some relieved, but all irrevocably impacted by the proceedings. Emily, at the center of it all, stood a little taller, her actions having shifted the course of her life, and perhaps others in similar situations. The judge's ruling, unexpected but deeply considered, was a testament to the law's ability to adapt and respond to human truths, however late they might emerge. It was a powerful affirmation that justice, when pursued with integrity and compassion, could indeed transcend the limitations of procedure and precedent. And in that moment, the power in the courtroom had shifted indelibly, anchored now in the strength of a child's voice and the judge's willingness to listen. In the stillness of the courtroom, where the echoes of past trials seemed to linger in the air, Judge Katherine Wallace stood as a figure transformed. Her next actions would defy expectations and set a precedent that would reverberate beyond the walls of her courtroom. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she looked directly at Emily, the young girl whose courage had shifted the tide of the proceedings. "You're right," she affirmed, her voice resonating with an unexpected warmth and conviction. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp, the spectators exchanging looks of surprise and disbelief. Emily's mother, who had been a quiet presence throughout the trial, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment, began to sob quietly, her tears a mix of relief and gratitude. The opposing lawyer, caught off guard by the judge's declaration, started to protest, his voice rising in a cacophony of legal objections. But Judge Wallace was swift to assert her authority, raising her hand for silence. "Effective immediately, I am overturning this case. Emily's best interest has been made clear today," she declared firmly, her words cutting through any remaining dissent like a knife. In that moment, Emily, who had stood with the poise of someone far beyond her years, allowed herself a small, tentative smile. It was her first display of genuine happiness since the trial had begun. A smile that spoke of burdens lifted, and a future suddenly brightened. The weight of the legal battle, which had loomed large over her young life, was finally being lifted. Judge Wallace, feeling the weight of her decision, rubbed her temple gently. She was acutely aware that her ruling would not just close a chapter in Emily's life, but would likely open a wider dialogue about the justice system's duty to the vulnerable and voiceless. The case, given its dramatic turn and the poignant involvement of a child speaking truth to power, was bound to go viral, sparking discussions and debates far and wide. Yet, The prospect of public scrutiny or professional critique did not deter her. In fact, there was a certain resolve in her acceptance of the repercussions, because today, in her courtroom, justice had been redefined. It was not administered through the cold, impersonal application of the law, but was demanded and upheld through the brave voice of a child and the willingness of a judge to listen and act accordingly. Judge Wallace knew that her decision might be met with criticism or even legal challenges, but the certainty that she had acted in the true spirit of justice gave her a profound sense of peace. As the courtroom slowly emptied, with people whispering and stealing glances at the young girl who had changed the course of her own fate, Emily held her mother's hand tightly. Around them, lawyers packed up their briefcases, and reporters hurriedly typed updates on their phones, eager to share the story of a legal outcome that felt like a breath of fresh air. Judge Wallace's ruling not only concluded the legal proceedings, but also set a new benchmark for how cases involving children should be approached and adjudicated. Her decision underscored the importance of considering the emotional and psychological well-being of children in legal disputes, and affirmed the judiciary's role in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Today, justice wasn't just served, it was demanded and delivered, guided by the moral compass of a system that, at its best, listens to and champions the cause of its most vulnerable. The reverberations of this decision would inspire many, reminding both legal professionals and the public of the profound impact of empathy, courage, and righteousness in the pursuit of true justice. As the heavy doors of the courtroom swung open, a sea of cameras and microphones awaited Judge Katherine Wallace and Emily Carter, the young girl at the heart of a case that had captivated the nation. The reporters, eager for a soundbite that would resonate across their networks, crowded around, their questions sharp and probing. A seasoned journalist managed to capture the judge's attention amidst the clamor. "You had already made your decision. What changed?" he asked, his voice cutting through the noise, hinting at the unexpected turn in the courtroom dynamics. Judge Wallace paused, her gaze shifting to Emily, who stood confidently beside her mother, a symbol of resilience and the catalyst for the day's unprecedented events. "The truth," the judge responded, her voice firm and clear, "and a child brave enough to speak it." Her acknowledgement was more than an answer. It was a nod to the power of honesty and the impact of giving voice to those often silenced or overlooked. Emily, who until today had been seen but not heard, felt the weight of the moment. She looked up at the cameras, her eyes reflecting a maturity beyond her years, and her voice steady despite the swarm of attention. "I just wanted someone to listen," she said simply. Her words, though few, echoed around the gathered crowd, a poignant reminder of the basic human need to be heard and understood. And today, the whole world had indeed listened. The story of a 6-year-old girl challenging a courtroom, a judge altering a ruling based on newfound truth, had spread far and wide, igniting conversations about justice, the legal system, and the role of personal courage in effecting change. The fallout from the day's events was immediate and far-reaching. Legal pundits and child advocates took to the airwaves to discuss the implications of the case, analyzing how a single voice could influence the scales of justice. Social media buzzed with discussions and debates, with many hailing Emily as a hero, a beacon of hope for other children in similar situations. As Judge Wallace and Emily stepped away from the crowd, a sense of accomplishment and resolve enveloped them. They had not only navigated a complex legal battle, but had also shifted public perception about the judiciary and those it serves. The judge, known for her strict adherence to the law, had demonstrated that the legal system, when confronted with undeniable truth, had the capacity to adapt and respond with fairness and compassion. Justice, on this day, had not just been passively given. It had been actively taken. It was wrested from the grips of routine and complacency by the courage of a young girl and the willingness of a judge to reconsider what was right. This time, the system had no choice but to listen, to reassess its principles, and to act in accordance with not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of justice. The case of Emily Carter would go down in history not merely as a legal anecdote, but as a transformative moment for judicial practice. It served as a testament to the fact that when the truth is spoken, loudly and bravely, the world cannot help but stop and listen. Justice wasn't just given. it was taken. And in taking it, a little girl and a seasoned judge showed that the system, for all its might and majesty, must always remain attentive to the voices of the innocent and the righteous.